You know, we make fun of Texas on this show, but they are very generous towards people with disabilities. For example, their governor, Greg Abbott, is confined to a wheelchair after a tree branch snapped, landed on his back in the mid-'80s. And despite refusing to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act while he was Attorney General of Texas, he was still able to collect millions of dollars from the owner of that tree, even though he has since dedicated much of his political career towards tort reform and capping the kind of settlements he received to about $250,000. In other words, he collected millions of dollars on his settlement, and then after he got his settlement, he's made it impossible for anyone else to get that kind of settlement again. And that says a lot about Texas's character. They elected him governor. They're very understanding and supportive of people with disabilities. And now it turns out Texas has a speaker. His name is Dade Phelan. He's a Republican from Beaumont, Texas. And apparently, Speaker Dade Phelan, Republican of Texas, apparently he suffered a massive stroke last week. But the people of Texas couldn't be more supportive of the man. I think this is great. You have a governor in a wheelchair, and now you have the Speaker of the Texas House had a massive stroke, and he's still showing up to work each day, and nobody questions him. Here is Texas Speaker Dade Phelan last Friday night, toiling away, working for the people, not letting a massive stroke stop him from doing the people's business of Texas, like persecuting the LGBTQ community and making sure everyone has an assault weapon.
Mr. Speaker, I move adoption.
Mr. Campbell, send out the amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment? The chair has done. The amendment is adopted. The chair recognizes Mr. Johnson of Harris. Mr. Johnson of Harris to speak in opposition to the bill.
It's not right. You want Niave? Chair recognizes Ms. Niave Criado to speak in opposition.
The chair recognizes Ms. Niave Criado to speak in opposition to the bill.
Isn't that great? I mean, you know, I'm sorry this man had a stroke, but he's an inspiration to all of us. The Speaker of Texas has a massive stroke and just gets right up there and keeps working.
Mr. Campbell, send out the amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment? The chair has done. The amendment is adopted.
Excuse what? Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't a massive stroke. Texas Speaker Dade Phelan was shit-faced. My mistakes.
Send out the amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment?
That's too bad. I thought it was a massive stroke, and I was proud of the guy. Turns out he's just an alcoholic. Well, it's too bad. And Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state, he saw the Speaker, the Texas Speaker, trying to speak, the slur of the House of Texas. That's Ken Paxton, and he's the Attorney General of Texas, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state. And he saw that the Speaker was drunk and immediately called for him to resign. Ken Paxton said that the Speaker was embarrassing the state of Texas. And given that Texas keeps reelecting Ted Cruz, you know, that state doesn't embarrass easy. But you know what? Maybe Ken Paxton shouldn't have said anything. The Attorney General should have kept his mouth shut. Because on Thursday, a Republican-led committee in the House that's run by the shit-faced Dade Phelan, the Speaker, miraculously, a coincidence, Ken Paxton calls for the Speaker to resign, and then all of a sudden, one of the Speaker's committees recommends that Attorney General Ken Paxton be impeached. Now, we've all known about Ken Paxton for at least 10 years, right? Why is he all of a sudden impeachable? Because their dipsomaniac of a Speaker is in charge, and he said, nobody calls me an alcoholic. Impeach the guy. I think that's what he said. What he said was this.
Send out the amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment?
I think in drunkese, that means impeach Ken Paxton for calling me a drunk. Can you imagine wanting to impeach an attorney general just because he called you a drunk? Well, actually, Ken Paxton, he was indicted back in 2015 on charges of securities fraud and failing to register with the state securities board while serving as a state legislator in Texas. He was selling investments and lying to potential investors, and he was indicted. Somehow the trial has yet to take place. There's another indictment. And back in February of this year, the Attorney General, who was indicted in 2015, the Attorney General agreed to pay deputies working underneath him inside the Attorney General's office. He agreed to pay them $3.3 million and apologize. He apologized for his retaliation. He apologized because he retaliated right after these 4 lawyers working in the Texas State Justice Department accused him of committing several crimes. So the Attorney General doesn't like being called a criminal, so he retaliated, and then they sued, and the Attorney General settled, agreed to apologize to them, and paid them $3.3 million. Well, actually, it didn't come out of his pocket. The state of Texas is giving his 4 deputies the $3.3 million. So to be clear here, Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, had people working underneath him, and they were paid to prosecute criminals. But when these 4 deputies discovered that the guy they were working for might be a criminal, they spoke up, and he retaliated. 4 senior staffers working underneath Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas will now split the $3.3 million. They already received an apology from Ken Paxton, the Attorney General. And as I said, $3.3 million isn't coming out of Ken Paxton's pocket. The state of Texas is paying those fines. It's great to be a white man in Texas, isn't it? Indicted in 2015, still no trial. And then on Thursday of this week, miraculously, for some reason, the Texas House filed 20 charges of impeachment against Ken Paxton, Attorney General. One of those charges is bribery. I don't understand why. We've known this man was a criminal since 2015, and yet the Texas House did nothing. Maybe the Speaker, can you explain why, Speaker Phelan, can you explain why the House waited so long?
Well, the amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment?
Okay. Thank you for explaining that to us, Speaker Phelan of Beaumont, Texas. What a great state Texas is.
You're listening to The David Feldman Show, you happy, self-actualized hump.
Recording on to the cloud. We're up in the cloud with the Hirschenfelds. Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld is a Freudian psychoanalyst. He is the real deal. Ethan Hirschenfeld is not. But he gives pretty good advice. It may be a lot less expensive to see Ethan Hirschenfeld and read his book, Today is Now. Hello.
Yeah, it's cheaper. It's also, there's an advantage, no shade at the doctor, the real doctor, Philip Hirschenfeld, who's a real pro and a veteran. But with me, the advantage is when you're working with someone like him, there's a lot of pressure because you know what he's saying carries a lot of weight. So you feel a lot of pressure to really listen. With me, it's way more chill. It's just very relaxed. You know I'm just making it up on the fly, and that can really free you up to maybe think of some things you wouldn't have thought of when you thought, oh, my God, this is really costing me money, and this is the real deal.
And maybe real truths can be told to a patient if the doctor is a fraud. I understand what you're saying, that there are things that you can say that actually carry more weight than a real doctor.
Yeah, and also my hands aren't tied by notions like medical ethics.
It's a freer conversation.
Professional standards. These things don't apply. It's just, anything goes. Which,
Okay.
Has its advantage.
Real
But
doctor.
he is not a fraud. I object to the use of that word. He is
I'm
just.
not a fraud, but I'm fraudian.
Sigmund Freud. You're a Sigmund Freud.
He's an alternative type of therapist.
No, we've been doing. That's a great introduction. That you're a Freudian psychoanalyst and Ethan is a Freudian. So you've been doing this show for 3-4 years.
3 years.
3 years.
3 years. 3 years.
And I feel I'm making headway. I've asked this question once a year. I'm going to ask it again. If real Dr. Hirschenfeld, how many sessions could phony Dr. Hirschenfeld do before he was found out?
It's Dr. Benjamin. Let's
The Dr. Benjamin, your alter ego, author of Today Is Now. Let me guess. I think, honestly, as someone who is the beneficiary of decades of this kind of therapy, some kind of therapy, if Ethan told me he was a doctor, I don't think I'd ever find out that he isn't.
I completely agree.
Because I'm stupid or because he's good?
No, because neither. Because of the ubiquitous issue of transference. You walk into somebody's office, he's the authority, and then you just play out your typical lifelong experience and reaction to authority figures. Now, so I'm not sure you'd ever figure anything out, even if he did things that were ridiculous. I was talking to somebody just this week, not a patient, but this person said that she had first started out in therapy with a Jungian analyst. And this Jungian analyst kept talking about these archetypes. They have some kind, I don't know what it's about, but something in their theory. So he was talking about archetypes. And after a while, she said, this doesn't apply to me in any which way. But at the same time, it was very hard for her to break it off because of her transference to authority figures. But then an excuse appeared, namely that her significant other was moving to another city. So she said, I'm sorry, doctor, you've been great, but I got to move on. So there's an example of how transference. Now, in this case, she eventually figured out that this was not her cup of tea and apply to her in any way, but sometimes it doesn't.
So it's the placebo effect in many ways. But how long does a placebo last, Ethan Hirschenfeld?
If it lasts more than 72 hours, you should call your doctor.
A real one or a fake one? Now, I have an idea for a series starring Ethan.
Okay.
Great, let's do it.
It's based on it's kind of like Mad Men, where Donald Draper steals the identity of his commanding officer in Korea who dies, and he's living a fake life. He's not who he says he is. What if Ethan Hirschenfeld just starts giving advice in New York City, and people come over, and then you put up a sign and a diploma, and people start thinking you're a psychiatrist. No good?
Well,
as an idea for a sitcom.
Yeah, no. The sitcom idea I like. I actually, it's a funny thing with any of these mockumentaries. I know that they're like with Borat and with certain versions of this kind of comedy. Part of the fun is the tricking of people, and sometimes it's a hybrid. Some of the people are in on the joke and some aren't. But it always makes me uneasy. I certainly, with the Dr. Benjamin movie, which is nearing completion, that was important to me not to ever engage in any actual trying to fake anybody out.
Right, but I'm talking about an actual scripted sitcom.
Yeah, I like it.
Where, you're married, the wife doesn't know that you're not really a psychiatrist. You're a respected member of the community. You're testifying before Congress. You're a hit. There's only one little...
But to continue with the Don Draper example, I think he'll have to kill me off first before he can assume this identity, no?
That's I like, yes, that's very Oedipal, right? I love that.
It's too edible. A little too edible.
Okay.
I can tell Ethan is thinking of something.
I'm having allergies. I don't know what's going on with me. When we start the podcast, I get allergies. It does seem something. It's not psychosomatic. It's pollen. It's simply pollen, but the timing is suspicious.
Yes, it is. I think David is a form of pollen.
Go on with them. Am I a busy bee? Do you think it's what do you?
Well, Feld is a field, so Feldma. So the field might be giving off some pollen of some kind. Right.
So you're about to perform.
Yeah. So I should plug this. This is a place called Jill Lindsay. It's a nice shop here on Myrtle Avenue in Fort Greene. They have a beautiful backyard, and my friend Sarah Nedwick, for a few years, has been doing a salon. It's called the Starlit Salon. Starts tonight at 7:30. She does it every month. It involves some comedy. My friend Drew and his wife, Michaela, did some clowning there last time. So tonight it's going to be comedy, some storytelling, and some music. I'm going to be doing some comedy. But in solidarity with the Writers Guild, I decided it would really be inappropriate to write any jokes.
Good.
So I'm just going to keep it very serious. And if there are any laughs, I'm going to admonish the audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was watching a documentary about the making of The Exorcist, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, the bejesus. Yeah. To this day, The Exorcist still scares me. And supposedly, almost a majority of Americans believe that you can be possessed, that the devil can be...
And yet, strangely, a majority of Americans don't believe that their car can be repossessed. They don't understand the basics of loans and liens. So, go figure.
So, demonic possession. I assume this predates the New Testament. Neither one of you are expected to know this. But the idea that there's something inside of you that's taking over and it's been assigned a name, it's been labeled. I think Dr. Benjamin says it's important to name it, right?
Name it so you can tame it.
And then you can blame it.
Blame it and claim it.
So, Dr. Benjamin, I was going to ask...
And then, finally, you can draw a picture of it and frame it. And put it on your wall, and then you're in total control.
So I was going to ask the real doctor, but let me ask the author of Today Is Now, Dr. Benjamin. Is exorcism, is demonic possession a real thing, or is it naming, taming, and blaming?
Well, so exorcism, it has origins that are religious, but before there were religions, there were pagan tribal beliefs, and exorcism was the whole shebang. because there were no buildings yet, so you couldn't have like an ark. There were no books. There were no costumes. There was nothing. There were no like meet and greet with cake and coffee after the services. There was absolutely nothing. There was no parking lot. There was no newsletter. Religions had nothing. All they had was demonic possessions, and then a guy doing a dance and helping you get rid of the demonic possession. That was it. So in some ways, demonic possession and exorcisms are the seed of all future religions. That's really where it all comes from. Mostly because there was no architecture. There was nowhere to hold a service.
And which came first, the building or the building fund?
Well, that first it was a tent. Before that, there was a cave fund. Yeah.
So, real Dr. Hirschenfeld, that makes sense to me. I don't know how much of that is true, but I think what your unlearned colleague is saying is a lot of people were acting up, they were misbehaving, and some kind of religious shaman would come along and rattle some bones and say, it's not you.
The devil made me do it.
It's the devil.
Yeah. And this is, it does predate formal religion. It's a form of very primitive thinking, and it still exists today. Our rational thinking is a very thin layer on the top of our brain. In the deeper levels, all this mumbo-jumbo stuff is still alive and well.
If you walk the streets of New York, you will notice, and I invite any of your listeners, if they want to come visit, I will take them on a tour. You can see this. There are chicken bones everywhere.
Yeah.
Why? It's not because people like to eat chicken. That's a little bit of the reason. The real reason is there's a lot of pagan
Santeria? Is it Santeria?
Santeria and other types of ceremonies that still involve. The idea is you're going to exorcise the demons that are possessing you somehow through chicken.
Waving a chicken around your head.
That you can do it like that. It can be with a fried chicken, a gumbo, a vindaloo. You can, however you want. You can.
Now, how do you do it?
It always ends up with chicken bones on the street. That's the common thread.
We have a lot of people listening to us in Australia, and explain to them, which direction do you wave the chicken if you're in Australia? Would it be
counterclockwise?
Counterclockwise. So,
because they are standing on their heads. So everything is different.
I think the chicken waves the Aussie around its head to get rid of demonic people. So,
can I give an example?
Yes,
of
please.
How this exists today in our political discourse? You're always asking me what I'm reading. Well, tonight I can tell you what I'm reading. I'm reading an absolutely fascinating book called The Devil and the Jews. And it's a scholarly book by a guy by the name of Trachtenberg. And it's all about how throughout the Middle Ages, like starting in the 6th century, the Jews and the devil were considered almost the same thing. The Jews were the children of the devil. They worshiped the devil. They were magicians. They learned their magic from King Solomon, who, according to the legends, could control all the demons. So if you think about it, it's not a very far leap from that primitive thinking to Marjorie Taylor Greene saying the fires in California were caused by Jewish space lasers.
Right.
I might have mentioned this on the show before when that weird story popped up a year ago, but there actually is a device. There actually is a Jewish space laser. It's a device used by real estate agents in New York to overestimate the size of one bedroom.
And on your eyes to get rid of nearsightedness.
Right.
How do we put an end to the idea that Jews are satanic? Where do people get... so you're saying it's a primitive way of thinking. It's delusional.
Oh, I got to tell you this. I once... Oh, doctor, you were about to say something.
Yeah, go ahead. I think I scared him.
I was once... in 2004 or 5, I was singing the role of the devil in the opera Faust, in the French version of Faust. And that same year, there were 2 other bass baritones who got hired to sing the same role in different places.
And all 3 of us were tall New York Jews. And all 3 of us were hired to sing the devil with these opera companies. And I remember thinking, this is curious.
Yeah.
But anyway.
What happens if you think you're possessed? How do you know the difference between real possession and
There's no such fucking thing as real possession. Give me a break.
What?
No demons flying around us. That's Bubba Mises.
But what about the demon rum and the demon lust?
If things are coming out of me, and I'm saying horrible things that I don't normally say,
right,
and doing horrible things, and I'm blaming it on something inside of me, what is not knowing anything? Would that be a type of what? Schizophrenia, paranoid?
No, type of hysteria.
It would be hysteria.
That's right. I mean, you're always saying horrible things. Right? But it's you who's saying it. The devil's not making you do it.
Did Freud, because as I understand it, Freud's worked with women who were hysterical.
And men.
And men.
It was felt at that time that only women could be hysterics because Galen said that hysteria was caused by a wandering womb. So how could a man have hysteria? He doesn't have a womb. But Freud found plenty of men who were hysterics. So anyway, continue.
I would assume Vienna had a huge Catholic population.
Yes.
So did he ever have to deal with exorcisms or people who thought they were possessed by the demons? Or
I can't exactly remember such a case, but for sure he dealt with hysterical Catholic women who had various beliefs. Yeah.
And fake Dr. Hirschenfeld, would you like to venture an uneducated guess on what Sigmund Freud would have said to these women?
Well, I'll tell you what Dr. Benjamin might say. Actually, no, what I want to say is that I like the idea of Freud being brought in to deal with someone who's actually possessed as a premise for a movie.
Yes.
That would be a really good movie. And then it's Freud consulting with the priest, and now they team up.
It's just in the scene, like think of Linda Blair, and Freud says, "Well, while you're lying down, that I've got you in that position, tell me about your mother, Satan." And he starts psychoanalyzing Satan. That would be at least a funny sketch for us.
I think it could be a good...
Are there things... Okay, Satan doesn't exist. Demons don't exist. Could a psychiatrist get shaken by a patient like Linda Blair in The Exorcist? Are there things that a patient in a controlled situation where she's, strapped to the bed, she's in a state of hysteria, and a real psychiatrist is brought in to deal with this teenager who is presenting as possessed, could a psychiatrist be scared by such a person?
When I was an intern, I was working in East Flatbush in an emergency room. And a kid, I won't go into details, but a kid was brought in who had been bus surfing, riding on the tops of buses. And his injuries were so horrific that the nurse I was working with later told me that I had turned absolutely white and that she was afraid I was going to faint. Mercifully, this kid died within a couple of hours because it was beyond any reconstruction. So there's an example. Yeah, doctors get scared by stuff like anybody else. Would I get scared by somebody who seemed to be possessed by a demon? I don't think so.
And if this person said, there's nothing a patient could say in that state that would creep you out. I'm not talking about physical. I'm just talking about, could a person in that condition say things that either upset you or scare you? Yes, right?
I don't know. I can't think of anything. Like what? Give me an example.
I don't know.
Dr. Benjamin, you make up an example.
Have you ever been frightened, Dr. Benjamin? What do you do?
Dr. Benjamin, the only time he's frightened is when a client asks to see his credentials. Because then he really has to scramble.
Well, but,
you can talk your way around.
How many PhDs is Dr. Benjamin working on?
Well, he came very, very close in 2 fields, and then there were a few others with some master's degrees in process, but mainly it was 2 in not comparative literature, but another comparative discipline that I really can't discuss.
So what does he hang on the wall? Just frames?
Just drawings by kids, not his own kids, just friends' kids, drawings by...
All of this is in the book Today Is Now. In our limited...
The key is to have a lot of books on the shelf, and then it's just... If you've read them, if you haven't read them, if you know how to read, if you don't know how to read, the key is just have a lot of books on the walls, and then people are distracted into a sense of being in the presence of a learned person.
Books by the yard.
Can I give you an example of when I was actually frightened?
Yes.
I was a first-year psychiatry resident in the emergency room in Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx. The nurse at the desk says, a new patient's coming in. The patient came in the room. He was very big. He was about 6'4", lots of muscles. He was a little drunk. He was very paranoid. He sat between me and the door. That's the last time I ever let that happen. And he was actually a drill sergeant in Parris Island. And he had a .45 in his belt and starts raving in this drunk paranoid way about what people were doing to him through, waves in the air. So, yeah, I was really scared.
But that's a physical, that's scare.
Yeah, right.
I meant more like emotionally, like being able to say something that stirs you up emotionally, gets you off balance. I mean,
can I just ask about that? What, that was in an ER? How did that guy have a gun in the ER?
It was Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx. My grandmother used to go there. That was what they used to
with a gun.
They used to.
Everybody's grandmother went there. That was 60 years ago or 55 years ago. They didn't have guards at the doors or any kind of surveillance stuff.
But this wasn't the South Bronx, but it was close to the South.
Pelham Parkway.
They had metal detectors, Ethan, to make sure you were carrying a weapon.
Right.
That my father was raised on Simpson Street, right next door to Fort Apache.
Yeah, that's the South Bronx.
Yes. Yeah. And my grandmother in the 60s and the 70s wouldn't move because her building was right up against Fort Apache, which was at the time the most corrupt precinct in New York City. And my grandmother said, "This is the safest place to be." And my father explained, "It is. They're so corrupt. They're not going to. There's nothing more polite to an old Jewish woman than a cop on the take." So they would go out of their way to help my grandmother because they didn't want, her testimony could stick. You were going to say something, Ethan?
Oh, no, I think it was Jim Norton who had a joke when you were talking about the guns and all that. I think it was his joke, but he's waiting in line at the post office. Some guy at the front loses his temper, pulls out a gun and says, "Come on, let's go already." And he steps out of line and says, "Hey, excuse me, sir. We all have guns."
We're out of time. What are you reading, Ethan?
Nothing. I'm going to get back to it, but it's just been periodicals, The New Yorker. And
did you ever get your story straight? Is it the grandson or the nephew who you went to see graduate?
Oh, right. No, we're still arguing about it.
Was it a graduation?
It was.
Graduating from high school?
Tulane.
Wow.
Tulane.
Wow.
But
get your story straight, because the real doctor says it's a grandson. You say it's a nephew. I mean,
we're gonna agree to disagree.
Okay.
I do want to just say one more thing, which was sort of a little bit of poetic symmetry. Years ago, I went with my girlfriend. We went to see Hamilton, the hit show, and we both thought it was okay. We didn't go bananas about it, and we decided at halftime we would go home and walk the dogs. Not that we didn't dislike the show, but we said, okay, we saw it. We don't have to stick around. We'd rather go do that with the rest of our evening, which we did. Then the commencement speaker over the weekend was Leslie Odom Jr., who played Aaron Burr in that production, and he was in the middle of his commencement speech, and when he started telling the very relatable tale about the time when he had to choose between a contract starring in an NBC TV show or doing a Broadway show, he was relating this very relatable conundrum to the graduates. That was my exit music. So that guy, all respect and props to him, but
you've walked out on him twice.
I'm 2 for 2 with that guy. Yeah.
Headline before we go.
Yeah.
The hardest ticket in New York City is still Hamilton, I believe.
Really? Wow.
And you walked out on it.
We walked out. That's how much we loved our dogs. That's what that story's about.
Dr. Hirschenfeld, I'll give you the last word.
Peace.
Thank you. Thank you, Hirschenfeld. Fantastic.
Peace.
Bye.
You're listening to The David Feldman Show. You happy, self-actualized hump.